Brad Gerstner, CEO of Altimeter Capital, is predicting the biggest super cycle we've ever seen. And of course, AI is at the heart of it. Bigger than the internet, bigger than phones, and even bigger than cloud. Check this out.
When President Milei gave his speech in Davos last year, and he talked about the rate, the length of time it takes for GDP, global GDP to double. And so we went back and we put numbers around these slides. And I shared this with my kids. For basically 2,000 years, there was very little human advancement. There was very little growth in GDP. It was about hunter-survivor. And it was innovation that started around the late 1800s that started driving global GDP. And that innovation led to this, right? It transformed humanity. Fewer people were dying in childbirth. More people were literate. Rates of happiness went up on a global basis. And so what gets me up every morning, in 1996, I grew up in rural Indiana. I go to law school, and I got into technology when I was young because I thought this might be my path out of this place. In 96, I see Andreessen on the cover of Time magazine for the Netscape browser. I gather my law school classmates around one of the few computers we had in the library. I said, this fucking changes everything. Right now, everybody's going to see the power. And I literally bought a one-way ticket to Silicon Valley, flew out and started walking up and down Sand Hill Road, introducing myself to some people. I wouldn't make my way back to it until 1999, but that was like, this is profound anthropological belief that this is the thing that drives the world forward. And so when we think about why technology from an investment perspective, I think it's the best free lunch in investing. Right? Technology has out-compounded non-tech for the last 20 years. 20 years ago, technology was 5% of global GDP. Today, it's 15% of global GDP. When we're here 10 years from now, is it going to be higher or lower than 15% of global GDP? Well, of course, it's going to be higher. And I would argue this moment, the birth of this super cycle. I know Bill Gates is speaking here later today. I heard Bill say in 2015 or 2016, Meg Whitman said to him, haven't all the interesting things been done? We have internet, we have mobile, we have cloud. And Bill said, Meg, we won't even start until machines begin to think. Machines don't think today. They're dumb. This is 2015. He's like, when machines begin to think with us, then the world really changes. Of the super cycles that I've been fortunate enough to be a part of, started with internet in 1998, 1999, mobile, cloud, social. This by far is the biggest and most impactful of all of them. And the reason I would argue that is the same reason Gates argued, right? Every single consumer and every single enterprise will reconfigure how they operate, because this machine will now make us all bionic. And I say to my kids, you know, some schools were afraid of kids using ChatGPT. I said, you have to become the best at it. Like, it's like a bionic suit that you get to put on. And the sooner you put on the bionic suit and the better you get at using the bionic suit, the better you're going to be able to, you know, have an impact on whatever you want to do, whether that's in Washington or the movies or technology or whatever. So that's why I'm excited.
Okay, so we'll come on to predicting some of the biggest opportunities in AI in just a moment. But Brad starts with technology's impact on humanity. We saw charts of humanity declining. We saw a chart of child mortality declining. We even saw it impacting politics with the amount of democracies going up. We also saw GDP growth, of course, explode and have a huge hockey stick moment over the last sort of 100, 200 years. So a lot of people are potentially worried about AI, but is this likely just going to be the most profound, positive technological impact on humanity that we have ever seen?
Well, over the long term, I definitely think that it's going to be one of the best things that has ever happened to humanity, provided that we can keep ourselves from tripping here in the short term and bringing a quick and dirty end to this whole thing, which I don't think is going to happen. I would have to agree with Elon that I think the chances are that we're moving towards an abundant and incredible future when it comes to so many different things. And why do I say that? Well, first we need to go back and we need to think about what is technology. And we can see what technology is by maybe thinking about what normal trade-offs actually look like in the economy. And so there's a classic saying that says you can have better, you can have faster, or you can have cheaper. Pick any two. So if you get better and faster, well, it's certainly not going to be cheaper. You're going to be paying way more for that. If you want faster and cheaper, you can have that, but it's going to be worse. And then if you want better and cheaper, well, you can have that too, but it's going to take a long time. And technology is actually human ingenuity applied to the problem of getting all three of those things at the same time. You want better, you want faster, and you want cheaper, and you want them all at the same time. And when we build tools that allow us to get better, faster, and cheaper, that's what technology is. And this AI supercycle that we are in the middle of is going to be some of the greatest tools that we have ever created to attain better, faster, and cheaper at the same time, eliminating waste, streamlining things that we're actually able now to produce intelligence, not just goods and services. And this is something that we can use to transform both the physical world around us and the abstract world of concepts, ideas, words, etc. And so these superpowers, these bionic suits that Brad is talking about, are going to allow us to achieve things that are beyond the wildest dreams that we have had. But at the same time, we also have to remember that technology is always dual use. And some of the charts that Brad didn't show us there were also charts that we should keep in mind as we move forward. And, if we're looking at the 1800s and the 1900s, those 2 centuries did contain just exploding global GDP. And then especially here over the last 50 years since World War II, a democratization of, better access to healthcare, higher wages, and just like a reduction of global poverty that is unprecedented in human history. But we did have World War II in the 20th century, in the 1900s, and World War I. And then the 1800s were also a relatively chaotic time as well. And so these technological disruptions, they produce incredible capabilities that we as humans then use to do some highly positive things and some highly negative things. And that's the thing that we just have to be very mindful of and careful about. And I think it requires, a lot of people to really apply themselves to the process of trying to build robust systems that are able to be flexible and adaptable with changing landscapes. That way that this whole thing can be harnessed in a way that is healthy for humanity. And that is, especially a unique challenge when it comes to AI, because it is something that is going to be so powerful and so intelligent, and potentially more intelligent than humans in a way that is independent and separate from us, which is a challenge we've never had to face before. So it is going to be the biggest thing ever for sure. It's likely to be the biggest positive thing ever for humanity, but there is some negative risk, and we have to be mindful of that.
If we focus on the opportunity of AI, why is AI going to be the biggest super cycle we've ever seen? Why then is that going to be such an opportunity for investors? Maybe that's potentially a little bit obvious. So then more specifically, where do you, and this isn't financial advice, where do you think, Hans, these opportunities lie?
Well, as I referenced earlier, this is going to be a huge super cycle because we're building some of the most powerful tools that humankind has ever had access to. And with those tools, we gain some of the greatest superpowers to accomplish things that we've never been able to accomplish before. So, that's kind of one level of why this is going to be so big. The other thing is that this is an existential arms race amongst a whole lot of players. There are big companies with very deep pockets in Meta, in Microsoft, in Amazon, and with Elon and across his whole host of companies as well. There are other players. And then there are also nation states. This is kind of a United States versus China. The Middle East has its ambitions and, doesn't want to be marginalized as the world moves away from a dependence on digging fossil fuels out of the ground. So there are lots of risks associated with that many people view as existential that, if so-and-so gains these incredible superpowers and I cannot keep pace with their development of these superpowers, then they will actually have the ability to abuse me, harm me, potentially put me out of business, potentially end my country, or exercise leverage over me that I can never escape from. And so there are a lot of people who have a lot of skin in the game, and they believe that their survival is potentially at stake. And because they believe that their survival is at stake, that's why we see this incredible level of investment right now into AI infrastructure. And so I think for investors right now, we hear that there's an AI bubble going on, right, left, and center. And yet what we see is that there continue to be announcements about build out of data centers that are just, unfathomable in scale almost. And even today, I just saw an announcement by Microsoft's CEO, Satya Nadella, of the giant cluster that they're building out now and how they're building out more compute faster than anyone else. And, I don't know what the foundation of that claim is. I know that Colossus 2 is going to be online here pretty soon, and I'm guessing it's going to be a bigger single cluster, but maybe he's talking about an aggregate, and maybe there is some foundation to what he's saying. But regardless of the specifics on that, we just see announcement after announcement of these giant data centers being built. And that's because everyone, this is a high stakes poker game that all the big players know they have to be in the game for. They have to ante up. And so for this point in time, I think that the opportunity for investors are smart investments into the infrastructure stack and into players that are developing differentiated distribution or platforms or capabilities. So, I am still working on my due diligence to try and determine, is AMD a really good play during this time? I think it's possible. I don't know yet. I certainly know that Jensen Huang and NVIDIA are very well positioned to benefit from this much larger than expected infrastructure build out. He's got an incredible platform business that, not only are they providing the GPUs, they also are providing a lot of the networking, and they're providing networking capabilities that are distinct and at the largest scales, basically uncontested. Even I don't think Google is able to compete with the co-located networking solutions that NVIDIA has. They are exceptional at distributed training, so they kind of have their own capabilities in networking. But yeah, I think you need to think about players that have advantages in the core technology of AI, which is all built on access to data, access to talent, incredible amount of energy resources that they can put on tap, and then of course large amounts of compute with really robust algorithms. Google and OpenAI are high on that list. I think Elon Musk and XAI and Tesla and the Elon ecosystem all put together is extremely high on that list as well. If you watch the pace of execution by Elon and his team, their speed with which they have caught up and potentially could leapfrog and move into a decisive lead is very impressive, but he's got very stiff competition from very well-resourced and well-motivated competitors too. So it's definitely not a game that is in the bag for Elon and his companies. They have got to execute as well, if not even better than anything Elon has ever done before in order to win here. So there's that. And then because of this stiff competition, that does create a lot of opportunity that investors need to think about for capital destruction. And so, I might be somewhat nervous about investing into XAI right now because they're still in the phase of mostly burning capital. Now, I'm not a private investor, so I wouldn't have access to that investment either right now. But, certainly for if I had access to OpenAI, I would be very nervous about that. It's highly one of them is going to win. Whoever wins is going to, or at least one of them will win, potentially more. And any of the ones who win big, obviously you'll make a return on your investment. And based on a power law distribution, if you've got good exposure to a lot of these players, then you should win very well as overall, even if you do lose on some individual bets. And then there are the players like Oracle. There are players like Palantir. I think Palantir is a great bet. Now, their valuation right now does make it a little bit less attractive than it was, a year ago, obviously. But I do think that there's a lot of room left to run for their execution, a lot of TAM that they can continue to grow into. So I don't think that that growth story is over and done. I think that NVIDIA is still fairly to maybe even undervalued, and they have a lot of runway in front of them. Like I said, AMD is a question mark for me, big potential. And if you're really deep into the technology and you can identify, who are the individual providers of components for cooling or networking that are bottlenecks that might get bought up or could see explosive demand growth, I think there's a lot of supply chain opportunity for people who are subject matter experts and really deep in the weeds and have high levels of discretion in their ability to invest in these types of companies. That is really all just focused on this phase of building out the infrastructure itself. Eventually, we will get to the point where the applications that are built on AI do start to come into their own, and then those companies will start just doing even potentially significantly more revenue than the infrastructure providers. But that's not the phase of the super cycle that I feel like we're in yet. So I think right now the play is still infrastructure, and obviously the individual AI frontier models themselves are part of that infrastructure, not just the hardware. And it's going to be a very wild, chaotic, tumultuous time. I don't think this is like the tech and telecom boom and bubble and bust that we saw in the early 2000s. I think there's a lot more meat on the bones of this technology, and it's a much more ready for prime time than the internet was in 2000. But that said, it is still can be frothy in areas. The competitive dynamics of just how much capital is being invested in some of these things might take a little bit longer to produce that ROI than people expect. So it is something that people really do need to invest in with eyes wide open and manage their risk very thoughtfully around. So obviously all of this, not financial advice from my perspective, but that's how I'm looking at analyzing and thinking about investments in this area right now. Before we wrap, I have to say a huge thank you to my co-host, David. Besides being a great co-host with a great accent, David has been one of the key figures behind the scenes helping me to grow this channel from 1,000 to over 16,000 subscribers and to put out regular shows that reach millions of views every year. When he's not moonlighting with me, he usually works with businesses who want to leverage YouTube to grow their online presence, and he's looking to take on more. If you want to get more clients and more brand awareness for your business using YouTube, I definitely recommend him. You can book a free call with him using the link in the description below.